In this video I'm going to show you how I built a Mini Sega Genesis Console lookalike, which is powered by a Raspberry Pi 4 running RetroPie. The console has wireless controllers and can be used to play a number of arcade, console and classic PC games all on one device. So you can play old Nintendo, Sega and Atari games and even some old PC games on it. RetroPie is free software and runs on a few different devices, but one of the best devices in terms of performance is a Raspberry Pi 4, so that's the board that we're going to be using for this project. The games being played on RetroPie are generally not very resource intensive, so you should be fine with using the base model 2GB version. All of my 2GB Pis are in my cluster at the moment, and I've got this 8GB Pi free, so I'm going to be using that. The emulation software mainly uses the CPU and GPU on the Pi, so RAM is not all that important. In addition to your Raspberry Pi, you're going to need a gamepad or controller. I'm going to use one of these wireless ones. You'll also need a micro SD card of at least 16GB. It's a good idea to put some small heatsinks on your Pi as well. We'll also have a look at some other options a bit later. And then a TV or monitor to plug it into. I'm going to be using this portable monitor from Decorn for mine. I'll put a link to all the components used in the video description. Let's start by sticking the heatsinks onto the Pi. There are two parts to the software side of this project. The first is installing RetroPie, and the second is to add your ROMs. ROMs are essentially images of the video games you'd like to play on RetroPie. Let's start off by installing RetroPie. For this I'm going to be using the Raspberry Pi imaging utility. This utility makes it easy to format the SD card and write the image to the card without having to download any other apps or the operating system image first. You simply select the operating system you want to install, select the target drive, which is our SD card, and then the utility does everything for you. Once you've got your SD card prepared, you can plug it into your Pi. We'll be loading the ROMs onto the Pi using a FTP client later. I wanted to make my own case for the console, so I decided to try and design a case for the Raspberry Pi 4, which looks like a Mini Sega Genesis Console. I had a Sega console myself back in the day, so that was the obvious choice for me. I designed the case in Fusion 360. I then shelled it out, sized it to fit the Pi, and added some cutouts for the ports. Some people have rerouted the ports to the front or back of their case. I just positioned the Pi sideways so that the primary cables would come out the back of the console. I'm going to be using wireless controllers, so I don't need the USB ports to be accessible with the case closed. I've created a couple of variants of the case, like this one which has the 4 USB ports accessible through the cutout in the side. This makes it useful if you'd like to use wired controllers rather, or your controller's receivers don't fit within the allowed space. I've also created an option with the game slot and vents opened up. This allows some heat to escape from the case if you're running more resource intensive games. Lastly, I've created one which allows a 40mm fan to be mounted into the case to provide better cooling if your Pi is overheating. I'll put a link to download the 3D print files for the case if you'd like to print your own. With the case design done, we need to 3D print the components. I used black PLA for mine to keep the original black console color. I printed the base of the case lying flat and the top vertically. I then cleaned up the support material and rafts. You can then screw your Raspberry Pi to the base using some M2.5 by 5mm screws. The standoffs are already printed in place. Next we need to add the receiver from the gamepad. The gamepad I'm using has an internal battery which is charged using an included USB cable and has a small wireless receiver which needs to be plugged into one of the Pi's USB ports. The case design allows 2 receivers to be installed, one on each of the bottom ports. You should be able to just squeeze them in past the bottom edge of the base with the Pi screwed onto the base. You won't be able to use the top ports without the USB cutouts, as the receivers stick out too much. I'm going to close up my case, but you'll want to keep your case open until you've finished the setup process, as you might need to plug in a keyboard to type in your Wi-Fi credentials. The console is now ready for its first boot up, we just need to plug it into a monitor. To keep with the look of my mini console setup, I'm going to be using this 8-inch monitor which Decorn sent me. It's got HDMI, VGA, AV and BNC inputs, so it'll work with any Raspberry Pi, even way back to the first versions. It runs on 12 volts, so it's perfect to take along with a Pi in your car for your kids to play games on long drives, or to use it for camping and RV trips. It's got a wide 178-degree viewing angle, and has built-in speakers, so you don't have to worry about bringing headphones along or using external speakers for multiplayer games. They also include a remote control, a slide-in wall mount and a stand, which we're going to be using. If you'd like to get your own monitor, they're available from Decorn on Amazon. I'll put a link to the display and other components used for this project in the video description. Let's plug in our cables and boot up our console. The first boot up takes a little longer than usual. Once the Pi is booted up, you'll need to connect it to your network so that you can install your ROMs. You'll also be asked to push buttons on your gamepad so that your console knows how to manage the inputs. I'll cover this all in a bit more detail in the write-up linked in the video description. This will help you out if you get stuck along the way. Next, head over to the configuration page and select Show My IP. This will bring up your Pi's IP address, which you'll need in the next step to load ROMs onto it. You can download ROMs from a number of online sources, including a bunch of free arcade games and ones with expired copyrights. Just be aware that even though these games are often many years old, a lot of them are still protected by copyright laws, so downloading and distributing copies of these games is illegal. I've downloaded a free version of Pac-Man for Super Nintendo, which I'll show you how to install. You need to open up an FTP client on your computer. I used FileZilla, which is also free. Type in your Pi's IP address and then the username and password. If you haven't changed these, then they'll still be the defaults, which are just Pi and Raspberry. The port you're accessing is port 22. Click on Connect and you should connect to your Pi, and you'll then have access to your Pi's file system. Open the folder called RetroPie and then ROMs. You'll then see a folder which contains a folder for each platform that RetroPie supports. You'll need to copy your ROMs into the relevant platform folder. As mentioned before, I'm using Pac-Man for Super Nintendo, so I'll open the SNES folder and then drag the contents of the unzipped ROM onto the Pi. Do this for all of your ROMs and then reboot your RetroPie. You should now see a menu item for each platform that you've got an available ROM for. Open these up to see the games under each, and then select one to start it. You can add as many games as you've got space for on your SD card, but because these games are pretty small, you can literally fit thousands of games onto your RetroPie. I like to keep this down to a couple which we actually play, so that we're not scrolling through pages and pages of items each time we're looking for a game. Remember to shut down your RetroPie properly before unplugging the power to prevent corrupting the SD card. Let me know what you think of my RetroPie console in the comment section. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more tech and electronics projects, tutorials and reviews.